but you're still out there at the mercy of probably the roughest seas in the world when you cross over to Antarctica. You have this like very distant land where the weather can change within a minute. You're like literally like looking at a place where you are like you look so small in front of nature kind of a thing, and that feeling is really it's hard to explain that. This is of the Adelie penguin kind of like almost flying, and it is almost that if penguins could fly, again, just that whole thing of the snow around it, and it was just one of those moments. As in, this guy had just come back from the sea. It was just jumping from one icebergs that were on the coast. It was jumping from one to the other. But it was just that whole grace, right? This
Yeah.
grace of penguins you usually see only if you're underwater or if you're watching them swim underwater. On land, they're these chunky animals just, yeah, trying to waddle their way around.
Hello and welcome to F Stopping by the Woods, a nature photography podcast. In this episode, Shreeram MV, nature photographer and naturalist, talks about wildlife photography in Antarctica. To be good nature photographers, of course we need to be good photographers, but we also need to be good students of nature. Shreeram is one of the best naturalists I've met and is a brilliant photographer too. For the last 14 or so years, Shreeram has been leading nature photography tours for data photography. His work has been published on Nat Geo Traveler, Sanctuary Asia, Savis, Lonely Planet India, and Nature in Focus. Shreeram was also recently involved in the description of a new species of lizard. Shreeram has photos and essays from across the length and breadth of India, from the rainforests of the Western Ghats in the south to the snow peaks of Ladakh and Spiti in the north. From the deserts of Western India and Kutch and Jaisalmer to the remotest of forests in the northeast, the endemics of Andaman and Nicobar, tiger parks in central India, and everything in between. Outside India too, Shreeram is widely travelled. He's been to Svalbard, Patagonia, Kenya, Southern Africa, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, Borneo, Java, and so on. He's also the only person I know who's been to Antarctica 4 times. And this conversation is mostly about that. I met Shri in 2008 in a workshop where we both were learning the basics of photography from another photographer. And since then, I've learned a lot from Shri on nature photography. But mostly, I've learned how important it is to ensure that nature always precedes photography in this field. Hey Sriram, good morning.
Anuru.
Happy to have you here. How have you been doing? Been a while since we caught up.
Yeah, hey, good morning. And yeah, it's been a long time. I think, almost a year since we did Borneo, man. So, and
Wow, yes, it has been a year
yes.
since we did Borneo. That was a good conversation on dipterocarps and primary versus secondary forests. And yeah, I think for those of us who haven't seen that video, I'll just share it here and in the YouTube video description as well. So Sriram, you're like the second person to be recording on this podcast. The
Oh, wow.
person before you, your predecessor was Sumit Moge. So you've got his large boots and heavy baritone to fill into. So no pressure.
Okay, minus the baritone, I think. Let me try.
Yes, that's fair. I think that's fair. So after Borneo, where all have you been to?
It's been a busy year after that. So immediately after Borneo, I did Java. Fantastic place. I think the landscape just blew me away. It's like wherever you look, there are volcanoes and there are these fantastic looking birds all around the place. It was good fun. Then I did a short trip to the northeast, to this place called Tale Wildlife Sanctuary. Uh, Again, one of those hidden gems. I didn't really expect it to be so awesome. As in, we saw a whole lot of stuff. I think the highlights for me, one, we saw a pair of limbless lizards, which I didn't even imagine in my wildest of thoughts that we'll see two of them, and they kind of engaged in some kind of a combat kind of a scenario. So that was fun. And then I saw this really ridiculously rare butterfly called the brown gorgon. Turned out it was sitting right next to my feet, and I just didn't even notice it was there till it flew. But it was fun. It's a great place. Then Africa. Then I did Antarctica
Whereabouts
at
in
the end of the
Africa?
year. Masai Mara. So we landed up there around what was supposed to be the migration season, but last year I think the migration was a little too early. and then it was very sporadic. So we kind of like caught a couple of small crossings, but yeah, it was a strange time. And then yeah, then I did Antarctica at the end of the year in December. Followed that up with a short herping trip around Argentina. Saw my first coral
Wow.
snake, saw my first anaconda, so I was super happy.
Saw your first coral snake. Have you not seen like the coral snakes in India? Or are they a
Okay,
different type of
an
coral snake?
addition, the American
Yeah,
coral snake.
the
Yeah,
American coral snake. Yes,
yeah.
yes. But amazing. Good stuff. So herping trip in Argentina, that's interesting. Whereabouts there?
We did kind of a circuit. So we did a little bit of the central Argentina around Buenos Aires, and then we went further up north to this province called Formosa, which apparently, from what I hear from the Argentinian embassy in Mumbai, they said nobody's ever applied for a visa for Formosa. So it is, yeah, it was very less visited province. And it was fabulous. As in, like, there was one place where we were actually standing and shining a torch, and we counted about 50 odd caimans around the area. It was
Wow.
just incredible. That place, the wildlife is just the number of armadillos we saw running on the roads, the number of birds. The birds, though, since we were like focused on herping, we really had to let go of a lot of birds along the way. But that place is magic. I would love to go back there at some point again. Kind of interesting from a lizard's perspective and all, but yeah.
Was this also a guided tour? Did you have somebody sort of showing you around the place and helping you?
Yeah, I found a guide in Argentina. This guy is a fairly young chap. He's just started doing his herping tours. And it was fun because he knew like his herbs really, really well. And he explored a good number of places. I think a couple of things we found were actually fairly rare, if not really rare. So that was fun.
Yeah, I mean, in Argentina, everything I see is rare. So hey, it
Exactly.
it's like when Sumit and I went to Madagascar and we were photographing a chameleon called the Oceleti, which is the longest chameleon in the world. And the first time we saw it, we spent like 5 hours making the perfect photo.
Wow.
And after that, we saw it 3 or 4 times every single day, and we're like, "Wow, this is not rare at all." But yes, the first time you see something, it is really rare. So yes. So this was on your way back from Antarctica.
This is on the way back, yes.
And Antarctica, this was your 4th or 5th trip?
This was my 4th trip to Antarctica.
Wow, that is amazing. So what is it about Antarctica that sort of what drew you there first, and what sort of keeps calling you back there?
So it kind of started off as one of those midlife crisis kind of a thing. I was like hitting 40 soon, and I was like, okay, there's a lot of stuff on my bucket list. I need to kind of get there one by one.
Sorry, but isn't
And
photography itself like a midlife crisis thing for all of us? But
that I
there's
passed like
like,
a long time back.
oh,
That
okay.
was like
So
15
this is
years
like
ago.
a
That midlife crisis happened like a very long time back. This was
got it.
the end. I don't even know which one this was. But
The latest version of midlife crisis, so to say.
Oh yeah, of course. That's always happening. So
Yeah.
So then I was like looking at the list of places I want to travel, the list of things that I want to see and stuff. And it was just out of a random whim because it seemed to be like the farthest of places.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I should do Antarctica. And then the idea just sat there for a while. Then I had a friend of mine who had actually booked a trip to Antarctica and was like, why don't you come along? And I was like, okay, since I thought about it and this seems to be coming true, why not? So I booked myself on the trip. My friend dropped out along the way, but I was like, okay, I'm going to continue and see what this place is like. And that was probably the best decision I ever made because this is a place that's like, in my opinion, it's probably the last true wilderness on the planet, last true vast wilderness, I would say,
Yeah.
of that proportion. And it was really like one of those magical things to happen.
So I have a couple of things I want to ask about, but when was this the first time you got there? 2015? Was it?
This was in 2017.
2017. Fair enough. And why do you say it's the last true wilderness? Explain that a bit for me.
So a lot of places. So Antarctica is a place which has been unknown to humans till as recently as 250 years ago, right? As
Yeah.
in, there were speculations that there was a massive landmass further south, but nobody had ever seen it forget about even visiting it, right?
Yeah.
And it is only over the last 2 centuries that people have been visiting Antarctica, given that it is such a forbidding environment. Uh, there's never been a permanent settlement. Even today,
Yeah.
the research stations are usually the people who live at the research stations maybe spend a couple of winters at most. They don't live there permanently ever, right? So it's one of those places that way which has been largely untouched by human activity. Because most of our forests, we're kind of realizing, for example,
Yeah.
like a large part of the Amazon, there are these vast cities that are buried underneath. And except barring probably a few like very remote islands and stuff where there's been literally no human activity, most of this planet there's been some interference from us in some form or the other. And this is probably that one place which has had the most minimum interference, if you will. As in,
Yeah.
it's a place where we've hardly had too much of an impact. So, but that said, again, that wilderness over the last 200 years, there's been a considerable amount of exploitation, especially in the seas around Antarctica. I would say the land is
Yeah.
thankfully protected by a lot of laws now and all that stuff. But in the height of whaling, I think we kind of decimated
Yeah.
the number, because like one of the stories I heard on these voyages was that the early explorers who went to Antarctica apparently couldn't sleep anytime during the day because of the whale song. There was so much whale song happening around you that there was no way that you could even like try to sleep. Also, it was like really loud and really a lot of whales and stuff. Now it's a shadow of that. Hopefully, it recovers back to
Yeah.
that at some point.
I mean, now you have to like, at least I'll be going on my first sort of whaling expedition, proper one in Iceland in June for a part of a smaller trip. But from what I've seen of videos, you need to sail for maybe an hour or two to be able to see one whale, right? And think about a situation where there's whale song continuously all around you. So yeah, interesting to imagine that. So it makes sense about sort of why you first went there, but you've also been there like 3 times after that, and I'm sure you're planning another one soon. So what keeps drawing you back there?
It again comes back to that. It's just that feeling of being like, you're kind of at the mercy of nature, right? You might be in a fancy shape, you might be like traveling with a group and everything, but you're still out there at the mercy of probably the roughest seas in the world when you cross over to Antarctica. You have this like very distant land where the weather can change within a minute. Every trip of mine has again been very different, and I'll talk about that a little later. But you're like literally like looking at a place where you are like you look so small in front of nature, kind of a thing, and that feeling is really it's hard to explain that. But beyond that, it's also like visually, it is one of the most spectacular places. You have these, like the mountains start right at the sea. So you kind of sail there and you start seeing these snow-clad mountains all over the place. There are these glaciers all around you. There is ink blue oceans, especially on sunny days, which you kind of sail over.
Yeah.
Like this time we had one of the most amazing whale I would say whale sightings, as in we stopped counting after, I don't know, maybe 40, 50, I don't know how many we saw. And they were like, you just had to stay out on deck and there would be a whale popping out somewhere around you. It was like incredible, as in it's just like something else. And then you see these little penguins running around, and you realize that these guys have created a niche in a place which is so far removed, and it's not an easy life for a lot of them. But it is fun. It's great to watch them go about their stuff and things. From photography thing, again, it gives me a lot of things to think about, because the excursions in Antarctica are fairly brief when we kind of head out there. And it means that within those 2 hours, 2.5 hours, you are literally putting all your skills to test in a place where, things change. There's no predictability of what can happen and stuff. So it's fun that way.
Yeah. So that's another interesting point. I mean, before we get to the wildlife of Antarctica, right? Let's talk about the continent per se. And I've seen another video that where you've spoken about why it was so hard to get to Antarctica and why it was discovered so late and the Drake's Passage and so on and so forth. But outside of that, when you just consider Antarctica, the landmass, it is about 1.5 times the size of Europe, right? It's a
Right.
big landmass, and that's the point you made about it being the last huge sort of chunk of wilderness. And I think typical expeditions are maybe 14 days, 21 days, and so on and so forth, 2 to 3 weeks. So how does one cover all this in like a couple of weeks? Do you have to sort of various harbors where you get down? Are you in the ship most of the time? So is every part of it accessible? So give me a little bit of context on how Antarctica sort of is covered.
Oh, okay. So from these shorter expeditions that we do, right, these 12 days to about 21 days kind of things, you're actually just getting a glimpse of Antarctica. It's impossible to cover the entire continent in that kind
Yeah.
of time frame, right? As in any big, even like a country like India would probably take a lifetime to cover, and that's
Yeah.
exactly the same thing with Antarctica as well. So what we do is a lot of the expeditions to Antarctica go to what is known as the Antarctic Peninsula. So, like Antarctica, of course, has ocean all around it, right? And Antarctica is also approachable from all the southern continents, from Africa, from New Zealand, from South America. So, what happens is the Antarctic Peninsula actually juts out closer to South America. So, that happens to be the narrowest passage to get to Antarctica, or the shortest passage to get to Antarctica from anywhere else in the southern hemisphere, right? So a lot of these expeditions basically focus. So it takes about 2 days to get from South America to the peninsula, and you spend about a week kind of traveling to different places along the peninsula, and you have something called South Shetland Islands. These are again part of the Antarctic biogeographical system. So you have, so you kind of cover different places. So every time you get off the ship, you are at a different, how would I say, different point, and you go explore. And the landscapes can vary considerably. Some places are, just you get off and you're like just zodiac cruising through glaciers. You're looking at icebergs and stuff. So you're looking at like that kind of a landscape. Sometimes you get off on land and you walk on fairly flat kind of an area. A lot of times you get off and then you climb because the mountains start right there. So you climb a bit, you get a nice, good panoramic view from the top, and then you kind of come back. So it's basically giving you an introduction to what the continent is like. There are, of course, more serious expeditions, which are adventure expeditions that go all the way to the South Pole and things like that. But these are, of course, longer. They need a lot more preparation. These are like, like it's basically like climbing any of the Himalayan mountains kind
Fair
of.
enough. You mentioned zodiacs and the smaller boats. Could you share a little bit about that? What they are and what
The
that
zodiacs
entails?
are these rubber boats. They're inflatable boats, and basically they're filled with air chambers. So they are like lightweightish, but at the same time they are supposed to be very, very sturdy in these kind of things. So
Yeah.
what happens is, so on these expeditions, typically you're on the ship all through the expedition. So there's no place
Right.
to stay on Antarctica, right? There's no settlement kind of a thing. So the ship becomes your home for that period of time.
Yeah.
But the ship cannot take you to land anywhere, to most of the land, because there's ice, there's icebergs,
Right.
a whole lot of stuff. So what you do is you alight onto the zodiacs. The zodiacs are small boats, typically 10 to 11 people can get onto one. And you get on and then you kind of traverse to land on that. Sometimes you just use that as a way to cruise around the area as well, because it's smaller, it's more nimble. So you kind of cruise around the area.
Makes sense. And how long is the journey from Argentina, the southmost point that you start from, to the first point in Antarctica?
On an average, it takes about 2 days. Rough seas, maybe slightly longer. Smooth seas, maybe a lot lesser. Like this time,
Got
we
it.
did it in about a day and a half. We probably a little lesser than that. So, yeah.
And I suppose you start seeing some wildlife along the way itself, right? Maybe skuas and albatrosses and so on and so forth, maybe even seals.
Of course, you see a lot of albatrosses, and that's so you have that entire family of tube noses that you start seeing. So, you see albatrosses, you see petrels, you see fulmars, A whole lot of those guys along the way. We usually see the wandering albatross. I think all the trips we've seen the wandering albatross. We see the northern and we've seen the southern royal albatross, sometimes the northern one. All these are like the largest albatrosses in the world. Light mantle albatross. This time we saw the grey-headed. So a whole lot of them. And it's actually fascinating. And these are usually found also when the seas are a little rough, smoother, because rough seas churn
Yeah.
out nutrients as fish for them. So along with the seasickness, this is like a kind of a remedy. So you go out there and you watch albatrosses and you shoot them. So it's fun to watch them.
Yeah, so it's a difficult choice. Either you get a comfortable journey with not so many
Exactly.
birds, or you get a lot of birds and a slightly
Exactly.
rough journey. So yes. So yeah, tell me a bit about the wildlife in Antarctica. How many polar bears do you see on average?
On average, you see about 3 to 4 a day, I think, if you sleep long enough.
Fair
But
enough.
yeah, as in polar bears are in the Arctic, right? So you don't get any. Thankfully, the penguins are able to survive because of that. There's no polar bears out there. Uh, there are actually no land mammals as such in Antarctica. Yeah, the seals drag themselves onto land or to ice floes, but there's no land mammals in Antarctica. It's largely a dominion of the birds. So the most numerous that we usually see are, of course, the penguins, and we see a lot of Gen 2 penguins, Adelie penguins, and chinstrap penguins. We see some predators as well. So the penguins in different stages of their life have predators like sheathbills, which go after probably the eggs. You have the skuas and the gulls that go after the eggs and the young ones. So there is a whole lot of those birds also that we see over there. In addition to that, of course, a lot of seals. So you get the Antarctic. You have the crab eater seals which are found around Antarctica. You get the Weddell seals which are found around Antarctica, and we also sometimes see the southern elephant seals. These are like I think the largest land mammals or mammals that come onto land kind of thing. They a few tons kind of thing. Sorry,
Wow.
carnivores. I would say not mammals.
Yeah.
These are like really massive. And we get to see leopard seals, which are a formidable force from time to time.
Which are also fairly common, right?
Not really.
Okay.
Actually, they are not very common at all. There are instances where you don't see them at all. There are trips where you don't see them at all. There
Wow.
are
Okay.
this time we saw a couple of them like on ice floes very close to the ship, so we were like quite lucky with that. Uh, yeah, watching a leopard seal hunt is not common at all. As in, it's
Have
probably one
you
of the
have you
rarest
had a
things.
chance to see that?
No, we saw them once trying to like go after penguins, but then we saw the penguins kind of go away last year. But yeah, I'm sure it happens more often than not because they have to survive. It's just that it's not easy. I guess probably because I don't know how affected they are by the disturbance of the boats and stuff like that. So I'm not really sure about that part. But yeah.
And is most of it underwater, or do you see them sort of going after penguins on the surface itself?
So you sometimes see the action from the surface where you see the seals back, and then you have the penguins kind of jumping out of the water, trying to escape faster and stuff. So yeah, that happens sometimes.
So really, really wide area of bird life, right? And how are they spread across sort of the continent? Do you have to make separate stops for each of these? I understand that emperor penguins are found closest to the South Pole, and it's not possible to get there by treks, and you probably need to have either helicopters or another way of getting to them. So how do you manage, not manage, but how do you plan your sort of itinerary so that you cover as many of these species as possible?
So these expeditions usually you get the three what are known as the brush-tailed penguins. These are the second largest group of penguins, right? The Gen 2, Adelie, and Chinstrap. And these are the ones that we usually encounter. Like you said, emperors are found more inland compared to here, and they're found on a different side of the peninsula. They're found on the side where there's a lot more ice to kind of cut through. So a lot of the expeditions don't go that side because one, there's too much sea ice on
Yeah.
the Ross Sea side. And the other issue is you need to, of course, take a helicopter to get there. And the helicopter itself can be a little dicey because the weather can change in the drop of
Gosh.
a hat. So, yeah, it's not an easy expedition to see an emperor penguin unless, like, I think last season apparently a couple of ships were lucky to see them on this side of the peninsula. There were
Oh,
a
nice.
bunch of youngsters that had like come ashore this side, so they were lucky. But yeah, otherwise you got to do the other one, which is kind of a it's kind of hit and miss, but I'm sure it's a fantastic expedition to kind of do that. The other itinerary which I've also been working on and which is on my wish list at some point of time is to also cover the islands of South Georgia and Falklands, because South Georgia has king penguins and massive
Yeah.
colonies of king penguins. So
Yeah.
if you've seen these photographs of mountains full of greenery and then these millions of penguins, it's from South Georgia. And that's a place I would like to visit because they are not found further south. They are only, and South Georgia is like east from Argentina. So yeah, that's the only place where these guys are found. You get a couple of colonies around South America, around Chile and stuff. But yeah, I would love to see them in that habitat rather than.
So I've also read that there are some colonies around Argentina for king penguins, right? So how different are these? You don't get these really large congregations there?
No, these are small colonies. These are just a
Got it.
dozen or so. I think Chile there is a colony which is a dozen or a couple of dozen, not too many of them. Argentina, there's been about 2 to 4 that have been reported, but then again, yeah, it's a matter of chance. I've never seen them. I've been there like thrice, never seen them.
Got it. Got it. So, I'm wondering, given that Antarctica has been not influenced by human settlement for a long time, which might also include, therefore, not having domesticated animals and those kind of interactions between wildlife and animals, how different is wildlife spotting there? Or how different is sort of simply interacting with wildlife? Because at one level, the birds and animals may not have, so to say, the fear of people, and they might let you go really up close to them. But we also have the risk of transmitting diseases that we carry from mainland with us. So what are the precautions? What are the regulations there? What are the best practices to follow, so to say?
Okay, let me just take a step back here in terms of a lot of how these expeditions are also done, right? So there's this body that it's a body of all the tour expedition companies called IATO. And these guys frame their own rules in terms of how things have to be done because there's no governing body of Antarctica. Right? Antarctica is owned by everybody and it's owned by nobody, right? So,
Yeah.
So, like, what happens usually is, like you mentioned, right? The animals don't really have fear of humans, and penguins they've not really been hunted a lot. Yeah, they used to serve as food and stuff, but not really like in the numbers of a lot of the other animals. So they usually don't have too much of fear of people. So they kind of approach you fairly close. And the guideline that we usually keep is, you don't get closer than 5 meters to a penguin, right? So that, that little bit of a distance is kind of maintained. If the penguin walks towards you, see if you can give it way, because a lot of times they're walking somewhere else and you're in the way. So you just kind of try to move away from that. If there's no way to move around, you just wait and hope that, the penguin finds a different route kind of thing. So it's basically trying to minimize or rather maximize the distance that you can keep from the animals as such. If you're closer and if they're like these colonies, you have these nesting colonies of penguins and stuff, then there's a perimeter drawn. So you have to be at least that much of a distance kind of away from them so that one, you're not transmitting any disease. Two, you're not picking up any disease from one colony and taking it to another place around. And I don't know if you've seen the news. So last year, there's also been this news about bird flu reaching Antarctica. There's been, I think, a lot of petrels, if I'm not wrong, and skuas, I think it was skuas, which were discovered with bird flu and stuff. And there's been that scare of bird flu spreading across the continent. So what has happened also is there's now a further tightening of the rules. So now you cannot really like sit down in the ice. So the only thing that touches the ground is your shoes, because when you walk back to the ship, you actually pass through, you walk through a disinfectant solution so that, all the germs are kind of killed off. But the only thing that touches the ground is your shoes. You're not allowed to like sit down or, lie down on the ground and shoot like that. You can kind of, because it's a hilly terrain, you kind of work with the terrain to kind of get your angles to shoot and stuff like that. But you cannot really like do any of that. You cannot put your camera bags on the ground and things. So you typically work with a team. So if somebody else holds a bag, you need to change lenses and all that stuff. So things like that. The whole idea being that tourism in Antarctica remain as sustainable as possible. And the fact
Yeah.
that, we are able to go back to kind of the same place that exists today, maybe about 100 years down the line. And
Yeah.
so that was actually one of the things that's been driving me back to this place so often, because every time I've seen that the rules are followed to the T, and it's quite impressive, as in it
Yeah.
is a commitment to kind of make sure that ecotourism happens in the way of ecotourism, right? Yeah, there are things which will eventually get better, I'm sure, as in there is, because you go on a ship, you're kind of burning a lot of diesel, all that thing happens along the way. But those things are getting better as we kind of speak and stuff. But on land, around animals, there are certain rules, and these are like really, really, really followed well.
I mean, I was hoping to ask you this question towards like the very end, but
Mhm.
since you've brought it up now, it's a good time to ask, I guess. So, one of the things that I struggle with is my own impact on wildlife habitats through my actions as a photographer, right? I mean, ecotourism is all sort of well and good, and we're trying to make things better, but we'll not ever have like a net zero impact on the habitats that we visit. And I saw this in Botswana as well. We were there in the middle of a really, really intense drought, and we were sort of driving around the place, and we had spare water to carry with us when animals and locals there were struggling for like a drop of water. And it's sort of, I don't know sort of how to sort of make peace with it. One easy answer is don't do it, which I don't think I'll be able to do. But how do you sort of cope with this? If is there a way? How do you find your own sort of answers on this?
Uh, Let me give you two sides to it. One is, let me talk from the Antarctica perspective, since we are also talking about
Yeah.
that, right? So that was a question that I asked myself after the first trip, and this was a question that a lot of people also posed to me, like, saying that, there is just that one untouched place on the planet. Why do you want to kind of go back and mess it up, right? Now, the way I would look at it is the fact that, like I mentioned, like the way things are done, right? I've always been impressed by that, and I would like people to also kind of appreciate and look at that in that sense. In the fact that, you're actually like making sure that you don't leave anything behind. You're like living a you're trying to leave very little footprint once you get onto Antarctica and once you kind of get back, right? Which is an interesting way of doing it. And I think it's also the place where, without being there, we actually cause a lot of impact on the continent.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So what Antarctica has had its warmest days ever in history. When the peninsula was, I think, warmer than some places in India at some point of time, right? And which is shocking, but it is not coming out of factories polluting there or cars being driven there and stuff. It is coming from where we are living right now, right? And the way I look at these expeditions is that it becomes an educational thing for people, as in the expedition crew does a fantastic job of that. I try to kind of add my bit to that as well, about our impact on these continents. And there are people who've been going to Antarctica for 30 years. Like this time we had our expedition leader has been going there for 25 years plus. This guy has seen how the continent has changed. He's seen glaciers retreating. He knows, okay, that glacier used to be this far outside, it's now gone. When you listen to that, that's where I'm hoping that a small percentage of people would start appreciating what we have, and see how we
Yeah.
can protect. So I look at it more as an educational exercise, and I think that probably outweighs the impact that we have on an individual basis when you're visiting the continent. From a generalized perspective of photography and travel, it is not an easy question. I think it is as big a question as what we do with our everyday lives, right? As in, how much is good enough, right? As in, it is, somebody who probably just lives in the city and doesn't travel anywhere probably pollutes a lot more than you would by traveling. It all depends on the choices that you make at the end of the day, right? So it all comes back to that. I think it's a larger question that we need to ask ourselves as
Yeah.
I would say, as a culture rather than anything else.
Yeah. I mean, not the intention wasn't to put you on the spot, but there's something I've thought about myself. And even when I was working in sort of climate tech, right, one of the things that we sort of came across was that as important as individual action is, which you and I can do, for example, by, say, not switching on the ACs at home, not using fossil fuels, using public transport as much as possible, the impact of that is good even at a societal level. But the bigger impact is when enterprises start taking ownership of their emissions and their impact on, be it the plastics they put out and so on and so forth. Or, for example, when the regulatory bodies start taking this more seriously, and probably for that to happen, we need a lot more stories coming out of these places, right? So while at an individual level, we sort of cause some harm, you hope that the things you put out there contribute towards some kind of either enterprise or regulatory action being taken towards the betterment. That's kind of how I make my own peace with it. But yeah, I know it's an argument that has that is based on convenience and not necessarily can be proven one way or the other. So moving on, let's talk about some of the favorite images from Antarctica over the last 4 trips you've been there.
Okay. Okay, so let me kind of lay out the broad themes I've had in my mind, right? And how it's kind of evolved over the trips. So the photos that I would be sharing, a large part of them are actually spread over the first 3 trips. I still have to, of course, go through a lot of the photos from this trip, but there's one that I've put up for this one. So it's kind of been a thought process and evolution, right? Like I think every time you go back, you're a little bit more mature. You've seen the place, so you're like thinking, what are the stories I can create? And it's also the opportunities that present themselves. So for me, the first time that I was there, I just wanted to like take everything because I was not sure when I'm going to come back, if I'm going to come back, what can I capture. So the first time I just shot like literally anything, and if something moved, my camera would be up and I would shoot, and then I would think, okay, what else can I do with this? Can I use a different focal length? Can I use a different angle? What can I do? And things like that. But then I still had a couple of ideas. One was to capture the animals in their environment. I wanted to kind of show Antarctica for what it is with, an animal as a subject kind of thing, and then kind of show stuff around it. And I was also obsessed with snow for some reason. I wanted that whole thing of, snowflakes and stuff. And this kind of was, the first 2 trips I would say was largely the theme for me to kind of get shots around that. So among the photos that I shared, I think I'll probably start off with with my favorite image of all time. And it's more of I would say it's just a connection. I think it was a long day. We had just camped in Antarctica the previous night. So I had not slept much. I was just out there enjoying, the night or whatever, the twilight of Antarctica as such. And then early morning, it was snowing heavily and we got on to this place. I think it was called Port Lockroy. And we had started walking uphill. And a lot of interesting things presented along the way. There was this couple of snowy sheepbills. There was a very nice white bird along white background. It looked very nice and stuff. And as I climbed higher, the snowfall became a little more intense. And then there was this one nest on the side and this penguin standing there, and it was just going on calling. And for me, that was quintessential Antarctica for me. It was that beautiful snow and this penguin standing there just calling out, that little bit of red of the mouth kind of making it very Christmassy. And I think, I stood there for about 15-20 minutes or something like that, just shooting that. And my cameras were wet, my lenses were wet, and there was, if something cogged off, then half the trip I wouldn't have anything, but all that just disappeared. I was just out there, just watching it, just photographing it. And I think that's still probably my, that's the photograph I connect to the most from Antarctica as such.
Yeah. It's a beautiful photo, very, very cover photo and there's so much going on. Like the snow falling sort of gives a very, very good sense of place. And, the penguin sort of looking skywards and looks like calling for help, etc. Very, very beautiful photo. And again, from your from your first trip, right?
Yeah, that was like, and then there's this other one with the penguin again, which I really like. This was made shortly after in this place, I think called Brown Bluff. This is of the Adelie penguin kind of like almost flying, and it was almost that if penguins could fly, again, just that whole thing of the snow around it, and it was just one of those moments. As in, this guy had just come back from the sea, it was just jumping from one, what would I say, one of those icebergs that were on the coast. It was jumping from one to the other. But it was just that whole grace, right? This
Yeah,
grace of penguins you usually see only if you're underwater or if you're watching them swim underwater. On land,
yeah,
they're these chunky animals just, yeah, trying to waddle their way around.
very
But
comical.
yeah, very comical in that sense. But this was like, yeah, this was that moment which I really, really loved because of that, because we didn't have the flexibility of going underwater there. So just watching this on land itself take off kind of a thing was just, yeah, something else for me.
Slight digression here, and I wonder what is it about sort of your first visit to a place
Mhm.
that invariably gives you some favorite images, right? And this, I think, is true for like both of us with respect to the places that we have gone to multiple times. Like I can think of, obviously you and the penguin image, two of them are your favorites from your first trip there. Uh, I've been to Chopper maybe 100 times, but like the image of the Chinkara, which is again from my first trip there, is probably my favorite. Likewise for you from Kana, you've been to Kana a few times, but the tiger sitting in the grass, which was from your first trip there in I think 2009 or 10, is probably
Yeah,
my and your favorite.
2009.
Nine, right? Yeah. And you've been to GRK like umpteen number of times. But I think that photo of, I'm not sure which egret, I think a Bonnelly's eagle with an egret kill on the cliff is probably, which you took with your 7300, which I still think was your best lens. And, what's it about first visits to a place that you seem to get these amazing shots and you can't sort of better some of them despite having better understanding of the place and having gone there multiple times?
I think sometimes it's the understanding that messes things up completely. I think it's sometimes, right, you go without a filter, you don't know what to expect, you make some brilliant images out of it. Like it's a very natural reaction to things, right? And I think
Yeah.
sometimes the thinking is what messes up stuff. You just kind of go with a free flow. I guess that natural instinct takes over and it
Yeah.
tells things happen. Yeah, like I think this that list is actually very long for me. Like
Yeah.
Agumbe, for example, my favorite image is still that one of the crab kind of like it's almost like dancing. It's shot with an 18105 or something. It's not even like the most fancy equipment. I remember my battery had died. Somebody got me a spare battery. I somehow got over my fear of leeches. But yeah, as in, yeah, I completely agree with you on that.
Yeah, even my Agumbe first trip went and saw the slime mold. I haven't got an image like that from Agumbe like ever since, right? So yeah, I think it's also the sort of first trip phenomenon of everything you see being absolutely new. So you're in a lot more sort of spray and pray mode. You're shooting everything that you see. You just make a lot more photos. You're less choosy about what you're shooting. And just as a simple math percentage, you have better photos. Maybe we should just,
Probably.
photograph a lot more in all our trips and not worry about have we seen this animal before, have we seen this bird before. So yeah, so yeah, those were two great images. What else? I'm sure you have a few more in your
Cool.
folders.
Let me pull out another one. Yeah, as in there's a few of them from my second trip, which I again really like. The one continuing on the whole snow theme, the one of the crab eater seal swimming, with a nice bluish thing. I think this one was one of it was like highly commended in one of these Smithsonian things or whatever
Oh,
competitions
amazing.
and stuff.
Good stuff.
Well, this is again an image for me, which is like, yeah, just the tones, that little bit of snowfall happening. There's that animal. There's that texture of the water. It's just such a calming image for me to kind of watch, and it's quite fun watching these guys swim around and stuff as well. The crab eaters around the boat and things. So this again is one of my favorites for that reason. It's just that whole thing of what Antarctica should be like, as in, at least in my
Yeah.
opinion, which is that whole snowfall happening, and you have little pieces of ice and snow and things.
What gives blue? What are the really, really rich blue color there. I've seen all your photos from there. Water reflected
It's
on glaciers as well.
it's reflections from the icebergs and stuff. Because the harder the ice is packed, the more blue it gets. So some of these icebergs which have been like, probably part of a glacier for a long time, they've been compressed, like all the air has been removed and stuff. You actually see them glowing blue in color, even
Oh
on
wow.
like very, very cloudy days like this.
Wow.
So
Okay. Amazing.
yeah, and I think this was in an area which had a lot of these icebergs around. So the reflections also kind of like tend to have that kind of a coloration.
Got it. Any other images?
From the same trip again, a completely different experience was with the whale tail. As in, this was again, it was the experience as well as a like almost a perfect image of the entire tail kind of coming up there.
Yeah.
Because these guys, so that morning again, we had some, I don't remember how many, three or four whales in that particular bay. I think it's called the Paradise Bay, if I'm not wrong. And they were like having a ball of a time. They were all singing and they were like, you could constantly hear whale song. They were kind of coming up at different places. Some of them, like, this was really close to the boat. There
Yeah.
were a few slightly far away and stuff. They were like all around, and they were there for the 2 hours that we were there. They were like continuously going about fishing and just singing around. It was fun watching them. Of course, shooting these guys is like really tough because you don't know when they're going to come up, and they really like go down super fast.
Yeah.
And early in the season, I usually prefer going there in like November, December, because everything is still white. A lot of snow is still there. All your landings, you get to snow, you get to walk on snow, you get to see snow, you get to photograph in snow and things. This is a time when the whales would have just kind of arrived from the north, and they are all very, very busy feeding. So a lot of times what you see is either this is a humpback whale. You either see the hump as it kind of goes down into the water, or you see the tail kind of coming out when it is really going in for the dive.
Yeah.
And this can happen anywhere around, and it's very hard to predict when this can happen. But this was fun to watch it, and at that close quarter, you see the enormity of the animal, and you're like, wow,
Yeah.
this is
And
something else.
what are the other species of whales that you can see there? I understand humpback is the more common,
Humpback is the
widespread one.
most common, and then humpback is the one that's also recovered the most after the entire that history of whaling happened in terms of numbers. But we sometimes see the fin whales. Fin whales are usually you just see them like you just see the back kind of a thing most of the time, just kind of going by. You see, and these are like really large whales. Fin whales are the second largest whales after your
Yeah.
blue whales and stuff. Then you see the minke whales at times. Rarely you also see orcas, groups of
Oh wow.
orcas. So yeah, a bunch of these guys.
Yeah. So
Blue
I
whales,
have
I don't know if they're common at all. There's so few of them left. Once in a while, people see blue whales as well. But yeah,
I have two whaling trips in Iceland planned. One is from the town of Husavik,
Oh.
which is like known as the whaling capital, and hopefully they've also seen blue whales there. Fingers crossed on that. And there's another place farther west from there, which is known to have seen orcas. So just for these two, I have two trips planned in Iceland for whaling. Let's see how that goes about. But my question to you is, if you're on a ship, right, and I don't think these are from Zodiacs, these might be from your big ship, or were they from Zodiacs?
This shot is from the Zodiac.
Oh wow!
That's
So
what
this,
made it special. Yeah, because you are like at almost at the level of the whale as such, so you get this nice perspective of shooting it.
and a Zodiac
From
is stable with all the whale activity around it. It doesn't sort of
usually, as in it's not.
got it.
There's like you get these small waves, but they're manageable. The bigger waves that you got to watch out for is when like a glacier calves and you have this massive thing falling into the water. Then you get like a nice wave sometimes, but otherwise, yeah.
And what's a good sort of focal length to be carrying if you're shooting like a whale from a Zodiac?
It depends. So this one I think was on a 300 or with a teleconverter, the 420, one of those kind of things. It all depends on how much activity is happening and how close the whales can get. Like this was a small area,
Right.
so a 300 to 420 was actually good even if the whale was slightly farther away. So like expecting it to come out a little farther away. So I would ideally go with a range of uh, zooms. Like if you have the 100, 500, I would say keep that,
Got it.
because you might also get a very, if the habitat is great, you might also get a nice shot of the whale in the overall habitat kind of stuff. But yeah, I think something like that would actually be super helpful.
Got it. Makes sense. Any more images you want to talk about?
A couple more which I really like. So moving on from that whole theme of just the animals close up or with their environment, one of the things I really like, and this is a thought process that's actually been developing over the last couple of trips, has been on like the minimal compositions kind of stuff, right? And one of my like the last trip I was there, I did a lot of images kind of trying to focus on showing the enormity of the continent and showing how small
Yeah.
the animals are, how sparsely it is populated kind of things. And I really like this thing. This is almost like these are penguins on a raft that are like going through like a sea of snow. And I really like just that mountain just peeking out from the clouds, and there's a lot of contrast in the scene as well. But it's just that whole feel of that little penguin colony that is nestled in the continent as such.
Yeah.
So really, really like that. And then of course there's this image of these two penguins which are like crossing each other. I just like that little bit of patterns like sticking out. The
This should do
reds.
very well in contests, I think. No,
Yeah, I have to try it out and see
I
how
would.
this goes.
I would recommend putting this in every contest that comes about.
Uh,
This is one of my favorite images of yours from Antarctica overall. I absolutely loved it. I think you showed it to me in Borneo, and I was
yeah.
like, this is beautiful. So
Yeah, this is
really well done.
one of my favorite images again. It's like just that little bit of red. It's just that. I think everything
Yeah.
else is so clean in this.
And probably worthy of a print at home as well. It's really
I
nice.
need to
So
try that out. Yeah.
good
Then
stuff.
there's this larger thing. Of course, this is more of shot from the top kind of thing in a place like Deception Island, a place called Deception Island. It's a volcanic island, and the black beaches, the black rocks, and then all these penguins dotted white, just waiting to get into the ocean. It's just that it's just got a very nice setting for me in terms of the white balancing off against the white of the sea, the contrast in the picture, and just the perspective. It's like a very top downish perspective
Yeah.
of the place, which I really like. This time we had very weird weather. We actually had very calm seas, and we had very sunny weather, which meant we had sunsets every evening. We had this very calm seas kind of happening. And one of the evenings we were watching the sunset. I think this was probably the first evening that we were in the peninsula or around the peninsula. And the seas were relatively calm. There was this fulmar that was like flying around the ship. And I was like trying to get some shots. This was fairly late. This was after sunset, so probably around closer to midnight. And I just started noticing that, as it flew past slowly, you could see the reflection of the wings as well on the water. The water itself had this very nice, soft texture to it.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I kind of took a few shots at like a fairly lower focal length and stuff, trying to get like a minimal shot. And I'm kind of quite happy with the result out
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
It's quite grainy.
Looks beautiful in black and white, and the grains definitely add to
Yeah.
it. And yeah, you can see even the quiet waves are so much bigger than the bird, right? So that
Exactly.
looks totally beautiful. Hey, speaking of sunset and things like that,
Huh.
around what time does the sun really set in summer in Antarctica?
So the sun sets. So it depends on what time you're there. So like December, typically the sun sets around 10:30, if I'm not wrong. 10:30 or 11 o'clock was the time when it was setting. And then it comes up around like 3 in the morning kind of thing. And it's all twilight in between
Yeah.
that. So you don't get like a night sky as such.
Yeah.
Of course, as the summer uh, goes on, it kind of gets more and more into so your window of twilight gets farther reduced. Like you're at about 60 odd degrees, 64 degrees south. So you don't typically have like a full day of sunlight. You have that 1 or 2 hours of twilight even at the peak of summer, and then it kind of
Got it.
gets back into this one.
Got it. Makes sense. So from photos, right? And photos is a large part of why I will go there at some point. What all does your bag to Antarctica contain in terms of photography gear? Which lenses? How many cameras? What are you carrying? Do you carry a flash? Are drones allowed? So on and so forth.
So right from the first trip, my dream has to is to have a focal length which can range all the way from like the widest angle to about 400 to 500 kind of a thing at least. Uh, so the first few trips was largely with a prime lens. It was with like a 300 or a 500 lens, along with a 7200 and a 2470 and a 1730, 1635, and all those kind of things. This time I kind of rationalized all that. I just took a 24 120 and a 100 400 with a TC, with a 1.4 TC. And I think that actually served me well because two lenses, two bodies, you're sorted out. You don't have to keep changing stuff. Like earlier,
Sure.
I had to change lenses because with so many different things and suddenly something is happening, you don't have the time to kind of a lot of times change and stuff. So you kind of take a guess saying that, okay, I'm going to go here. Let me carry these two lenses and carry the others in the bag and shift. But I would recommend that. I would recommend just carry two lenses that can cover the maximum range for you and you're sorted.
And which
Because it's
100
all
400 is this? Sorry, go ahead.
this is a Nikon 100 400Z.
Oh, I didn't know they had a 100 400.
They just came out. They came out one when they launched the Z series. It's a 4.5 to 5.6. It's a nice, neat lens. It's a super light lens. It's actually probably about the same weight as my 7200, and more than good enough for a lot of this stuff.
They also have a 180 600, if I'm not mistaken.
So I tried both of them. I picked up this because of the weight. It's just
Sure.
super lightweight.
Yeah.
It just makes sense to carry it around. With a 1.4 TC, it actually works. You lose about 2/3 stop compared to 180 600, but it's fair.
So your recommendation is going to be carry two lenses that cover your widest to your longest, and
Exactly.
don't worry about a third or a fourth or a fifth lens.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm still going to go there with 20 lenses. What about drones and stuff like that?
Okay, so flashes are usually frowned upon. I don't know if there's a strict rule on that as such. Drones are a no-no from the IATO perspective. So
Got
basically,
it.
drones are only supposed to be used for research or any documentation. So if you want to carry a drone, you can apply for a permit, like about 6 months in advance or something like that. I don't think a permit has ever been granted, at least on all the ships that I have been, because I've not seen anybody carrying a drone so far. It seems to be a fairly tough process to get one through.
Fair enough. That makes sense. That's pretty much the case with countries in Africa as well. I mean, some people do shoot, but if you were to try to carry a drone with permissions and so on and so forth, it's quite a process, and they typically don't allow it just for photography. And I'm also guessing that there's a lot more sort of precautions because it's really cold there, right? And you're out in the snow all the time, whenever you're shooting, or you're in a very cold sea. So what other precautions do you need to take there to be able to photograph?
Oh, nothing much. Actually, it gets to about -5-ish, I think, is what is the least that I have experienced from what I recollect. So basically, you need to carry enough layers. So have your inner thermal layer, and you get this nice parka that the ships usually either loan or they give you as a complimentary thing. The parka usually has your warming layer as well as your wind and waterproof layer. So that kind of takes care of a lot of stuff. You put on gloves, you basically dress expecting weather to turn bad. As in, even if it's the sunniest of thing, you expect that,
Yeah.
In case things turn around, you have enough gear on you. Plan for about -10 degrees and you're sorted. It's not too bad at all that way.
Got it. And what's the planning horizon like if I need to go there, say in 2026 or 2027 in summer? When do I need to start with booking and things like that?
So usually the bookings open about 2 years in advance these days. So I think right now the 26-27 season is also on sale and a lot of these things. It all depends. As in, you get deals sometimes which are really good, so you just pick them up and stuff, and you roll with that. Uh, but yeah, if like especially when you're from India and you don't want to spend like a lot of time in Argentina or something, the best thing is to plan at least I would say about 6 months in advance so that you have everything sorted out as
And what might be
such.
the ballpark cost of an expedition for, say, 12 to 14 days?
So the 10 to 12 days thing is the usual pattern these days. Like you spend about 4 to 5 days in Antarctica, and then the rest of it is in the voyage and Ushuaia.
Right.
That works out to about, yeah, say between 10 to 12,000 for a reasonably comfortable voyage.
Fair enough. So fairly steep in that sense, right? It's
It
I'm
is.
guessing like 2 or 3 Africa trips together for this one, so to say, if I
Because it
roughly do
is
the math.
like you have small ships, right? The ships are all 100 to 200 people
Yeah,
kind of a thing. The good expedition ships, in my opinion.
yeah,
That's because you only 100 people are allowed to be on land at any point of time. That's again one of the IATA guidelines. So a small ship of 100 to 200 makes sense because then you will be there at every landing. A bigger ship, what happens usually, from what I understand, is either the landings take too long or you are made to skip some landings, right? So you do an alternate landing kind of thing. So I would suggest going with a smaller one. And so because of that, your cost, of course, goes up also considerably.
yeah, makes sense. And you lead some of these tours as well, right? From Darter or otherwise.
Yes, yes. So the first trip was a personal trip to kind of understand the place, but after that, three trips have been darter tours. Place.
And have you already scheduled the one for next year? If I had to share a link or something like that.
We have the schedule in place. I'll share the link with you. This will be happening December 9th to 19th
Got it.
of this year.
Got it. Cool, cool. Awesome. So let me see if I can make it to that. Let's see how it goes. I'm really, really keen on Antarctica. It's something I plan to do, but I'm also keen on Patagonia. So I'm wondering if there is a way in which I can club this and the Patagonia together and see how this plans out. So yeah, let's see. Uh,
Cool.
Anything else that you'd sort of like to share as an important sort of tip or something that one needs to keep in mind for going to Antarctica? Any sort of closing thoughts on that?
A couple of thoughts. I think one from a photography thing, and this is something I've actually been telling people not just for Antarctica but for literally any of these big expeditions, is that what I've realized is most people land up there without having done a bit of practice on photography or having tried out their
Sure.
gear, understood the settings and stuff like that, right? So when you're there, the first 2 days just goes off into figuring out how you're going to be shooting. I think a little bit of preparation helps a lot because, like I said, again, with Antarctica, it becomes like a rapid fire thing. You're there for like 2 hours. You make the best of the 2 hours at the same time exploring the place because most of the time you're in awe of the landscape as such. So within that, getting your reflexes to work from a photography thing means that a bit of practice definitely helps. The other thing I would also say is there are no polar bears in Antarctica, of course, which means that, that whole fascination of big mammals and, big hunts and grand spectacles and all is not going to happen. I think Antarctica itself is a grand spectacle. And I think that is what one should aim to see there. Everything else is
Yeah.
a bonus. It's like going to the moon. You won't see anything on the moon, yeah, but going to the moon is a big deal. Antarctica is exactly like that, probably even tougher than that. Because we've been seeing the moon for ever since mankind evolved. We've not seen Antarctica till 200 years ago. So I think
That's fair. Yeah, I think if you do a little bit of research on Antarctica and understand why it's called what it's called, you realize that there are no bears there. Fair enough. So that's that actually. Thank you for your time. I don't know when this is going to be posted. We are recording this on 21st Feb. I have a fair bit of backlog. I have a lot of things from Botswana to upload, but as and when it goes, I'll let you know. Thank you for your time. Great chatting as always, and hopefully we'll catch up in person soon enough.
cool. Thank you for this. And it was fun chatting up. Yes.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you.